Today I'd like to take you on a journey to explore the impact of uncertainties on conservation auction. But before I begin this, I'd like to acknowledge my support network and my supervisory team, and I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet today. Thank you very much. Let's get back to our journey. Conservation auctions have been used time immemorial over the past 30 years. Started in the United States of America, where they had problems with soil erosion. So the government decided to approach farmers and talk to them and see how they could solve this particular problem. So in a nutshell, conservation auctions are designed to attract private landowners. So why is this topic important? We're going to focus on risk, which, we think literature has always talked about improving the efficiency of conservation tenders, but the aspect of risk has been missing, and therefore our paper was focused on how to mitigate some of these risks that are present in conservation tenders. So we are motivated by, first, it's very efficient because conservation tenders tend to thrive in a more competitive environment because you tend to attract more farmers, and once you have competition, then you as a farmer, you'd want to participate in that program. So if you ask for more, then you risk missing out. So it's very cost efficient in a more competitive setting. Sometimes the aspect of risk always hinders the development of this particular program, especially if you're a farmer and well, I have to adopt this practice, but it's really risky for me. So what I'll say, well, I will not be able to participate. So the concept of risk is very important for any environmental program or any particular business. And there's some of the tools that have been used to manage some of this risk, but in literature, especially in the area of conservation auction, there's actually nothing that's been used to sort of help mitigate some of this risk. And why is it important? Because we build resilience among farmers and communities, because once one's exposed to risk, it's not just an individual problem, it becomes an economic issue. So I'll just get you through the concept of reverse auction, which is an example of conservation tender is an example of a reverse auction. So here we have a buyer. We could say you're the regulator. You want to procure some goods, and you have a set of farmers, and farmers will bid against each other. Whoever is the least, whoever has got least cost gets selected, and those who are most expensive farmers miss out. So as we can see, if you've got a pool of farmers, let's say you've got 3 farmers versus 10 farmers, if you're bidding in an environment of 3 versus 10, you will tend to bid more competitively. Therefore, we'll look at 2 stages of our conservation tender. First, we have the program design, or where you have the regulator who has a particular objective. For example, assume you're a regulator and you would like to procure an environmental good in a particular area. Say you want farmers to minimize the use of chemical fertilizer, or you want farmers to plant trees, any objective. Once you have that, then you will go to your design stage guided by your objective. And after you've designed this particular program, you will have farmers in the next stage, where we are calling the bidding stage. So here in the bidding stage, you have farmers who, before they bid, we call it pre-bid stage. This is where you as a farmer, you look at your sales and you have your different dynamics, and you will say, well, this program is beneficial for me or for my community. So in this pre-bid stage, some of the aspects might affect particular farmers, and we refer to this as an iceberg syndrome. So if you imagine of an iceberg, you have the tip of an iceberg there, but this is not the real iceberg. The real iceberg is down here. So you as a farmer, when you're preparing your bid, if you only focus on the tip and not look at other factors that might influence your participation or the success of the particular objective of the government, then you tend to have lots of problems later, as we'll see in the next couple of slides, how this part of the iceberg will tend to impact farmers' objectives and also the goal of the particular program. So once you have passed the pre-bid stage and you've decided to participate in the program, you will go and formulate your bid. So how do farmers formulate their bid? So this is during the bidding process. We assume two types of farmers, those who are profit maximizers and those who are utility maximizers. For risk-neutral person, you have your own opportunity cost. For example, as the example we gave, you have your current farming practice and you want to change to adopt a new practice. So this represents your opportunity cost. So now, suppose this is your new practice and you assume that the practice will lead to a low profit. This is now your expected profit. So Q here, this is your benchmark. You say, well, with the new practice, I expect to get, say, $80. And there's a chance that I'll lose either $10, $20, $30, or $40. So that's denoted by magnitude. So this omega denotes your magnitude of loss. And this Q is your chance of loss. So if you put that together, it gives you that. But then you as a farmer, you just don't want to use this because your estimates of Q is subjective. You might say, well, this new practice, I will have 20% chance of loss. But because there's different economic conditions, you might have been wrong about your estimates. So what you do, you have to adjust it. And we call this factor here a security loading or a correction factor. So you correct such that if you had made a mistake, this will sort of capture the difference. So once you have formulated your opportunity cost, this difference, this is what the payment that you want the government to give you. So new practice, you get that, and this is your conventional farming. And then you just don't want to ask for your opportunity cost because most farmers would like to make a profit from this particular program. So what they do, they have an extra term which we call participation premium or rent or markup. So apart from your opportunity cost, you want to ask for something extra. I want to gain from the system. That's what some people say. So this is our optimal bidding model for a risk-neutral bidder. And if you look at for a risk-averse bidder, it's a bit different because a risk-neutral bidder wants to maximize their profit, but for a risk-averse bidder, which is given by this, wants to maximize their certainty equivalent. So if you look at these two equations, up here you have the opportunity cost, but for a risk-averse bidder, he's willing to pay an extra, what we call risk premium, just to avoid these gambles. Because in here we have a gamble, whether you can gain $10 or you can lose $10. But for a risk-averse bidder, they say, well, I can pay $2, and for you to assure me that I'll get $80. So they're willing to part with, let's say, $2. So that's the difference. And the risk premium for, as we'll see later, this markup for risk-averse bidder tend to be lower. And what happens if you introduce a risk mitigation tool? So we have risk-averse bidder with insurance. So here, as you can see, the expected profit over here is different because your loss has been mitigated by you paying that particular premium. So you, instead of, here you only have, in our equation, as you can see, we only have magnitude of gain. So this is your probability that you will gain something. As we saw prior, we had this bit here. So here you can either lose or you can gain. But with insurance, what it's done, it's removed that bit of negative omega. So this is the mathematical bit, but I'll just summarize this by giving you a diagram. So you as a farmer, you start with the opportunity costs. You're risk neutral, risk averse, it doesn't matter. You have your opportunity costs. And you can adjust your bid based on unforeseen events. You're like, well, this year might be a good year, next year might be a bad year or something. So you want to adjust for that. And then you can say, well, I just don't want to adjust for this, or I got to make some profit. So you can add a little bit of rent or markup. And once you have all that, then you have your optimal bid. So if you're assuming you're not the only person in that program, so you have different thermometers. So you have some bids, optimal bids here, optimal bid there, optimal bid up to there. But the person who is here gets the first priority. So you get selected, and then the other person up to what the budget is when the regulator's been able to select a particular group of people. So we can ask ourselves then, after we've finished bidding, and then post-bid, that's where regulator will select. So that's where the selection process comes into play. So you have lowest bidders getting in or winning the contracts, and those who are high bidders tend to lose it. So we can ask ourselves then, so how do those factors that we talked about, your chance of loss or magnitude of loss or your correction factor, how does that impact on your optimal bid? So here we can see that as the probability of loss increases, as you'd expect, for a risk-neutral person, your bid will increase. And that makes sense, because if you knew you had a 20% chance of loss versus 30% chance, you will increase, you will adjust your bid accordingly. But if you compare between a risk-neutral and risk-averse bidder, here we assumed uniform distribution to just give us an overview. So we can see that for a risk-averse bidder, it's more gentle. The marginal increase in their bid is at a lower rate than a risk-neutral bidder. So that's the difference between a risk-neutral and risk-averse bidder. And so what happens to the magnitude of loss and gain? So I will explain this using this particular scale diagram. So for example, if your loss, you put it on a scale, see if you have a higher probability of getting a reward, then you will adjust your bid, you will ask for lower. But if your risk is higher, then you to compensate for that particular risk, this scale will tip to your left. Okay, so then what happens with the magnitude of loss in the presence of an insurance? We see that regardless of what this value is, omega, you will always reduce your bid because there's no chance of loss. So, and it does make sense, because if you knew you were not going to make any loss, then there's no need for you to ask for more, because that's already been catered for by an insurance. So, and I'll just present the timeline with an insurance, what we're calling an embedded insurance, which is, it's part of your contract. It's pretty much the same as you had before. You formulate your bid, and then in here you have you have your estimate, that's your magnitude of loss or gain. And then based on that, then they will estimate your insurance. And then after that, the regulator will rank and select, and then you carry out your conservation work, and then nature decides, well, you made a loss. In this case, you won't have any problem because you had insurance, so you get compensated. But for those who did not have insurance, it's too bad for them because some of them go bankrupt, or you have to look for other means of survival. Therefore, it's important to consider these three factors as we've seen. Probability of loss, what's your chance of loss? It's very important, especially for any particular program, because if you don't consider these and we assume that there's no risk at all, then there will be a problem with the program as it runs along. And then also the magnitude of loss, assuming you have a chance of losing $10 versus you have a chance of losing $1,000. So the impact of $10 might not be that severe. But with $1,000, depending on your dynamics and your social status, it will have an impact in one way or another. And as we've seen, conservation options are more targeted towards low individual landholders. Might not be a business, but private landowners. And then we have also said, because you do not know, or you don't have, this Q is not objective, it's subjective, you have to correct for like your expectation of gaining or losing. So we had this, what we call correction factor. You correct for, in case you might have made a mistake.
Can I just clarify what's the source of the loss? If your farmer is expecting a loss, what's that about? Is that like the opportunity's cost is greater than they thought, or what is it?
So as we saw here, we have, when you're estimating you have your benchmark profit here. This is your benchmark. You say, well, with this new technology, I expect to get $80, but it might go up and down. It might be plus 80 plus 10 or minus 10. So this is the source of your loss.
So the loss is relative to some predetermined
yes.
benchmark.
Yeah. So, and this benchmark, we're assuming you just have a rough idea.
It's like it's a mental target. Sort of.
Yeah. Like say you're using less input, let's say less fertilizer. Yeah. Your yields might be lower or high, depends. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Thank you.
That's okay. So So number two, what you need to consider is rent seeking. So for example, we've seen profit, if you're a profit maximizer, you tend to ask for more. So we did run some simulation to compare farmers bidding with and without insurance, and this is what we observed. We see that on average, and this has also been backed by literature, if you don't have insurance, you tend to have markup of about 30-35%. And the experiments have shown that, people ask for 35%. But you see, when you have insurance, then you still have markup, but it's about 26%. So you've got about 10% difference, 10% difference. So, and this might have an impact in your budget. For example, if you have to pay, in your program, you have to pay 35% of the budget goes towards rent. It means it's not going to be effective in the long run. So, and we can see insurance does reduce markup a fair bit. And number three, risk mitigation strategies. So we've seen insurance is just one of the tools. And apart from you looking at it from a microeconomic level, it has an impact, or it has a ripple effect to the economy as a whole. So I'll present some few examples that I got from literature on how risk impact people. So this paper was looking at disaster, like major catastrophes. So they had two examples, two different islands, New Zealand and Haiti, 2010, both had the same, they were faced with the same problem. There was an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0 on a Richter scale. But with New Zealand, because insurance is mandatory, 81% of the losses were covered. Like there was lots of disruption, the major airport, there was, buildings and, reconstruction going on, and the payouts were not that, immediate. They take time. But as you can see, 81% of the losses were covered by insurance, but with Haiti, just under 1%. And during that year, the following year, it took about 2 years. 2 years later, they had only managed to get rid of 20% of the rubble. And there was lots of diseases and human suffering, and it was all over the media, and people were like, what's going on here? And they were able to make some contribution and donation, and on that year, over $10 billion was raised. And was able to help Haiti to, grow back to, to improve their GDP, because GDP also had an impact. Their GDP fell from 3.5% to negative 5.1%. So as you can see, risk or disaster might be an individual, it might affect one individual, but all the disruptions, foregone input, some of production capacity is reduced, and you find some people, human suffering, also from a social welfare perspective, diseases and education, because if there's disaster, you will not be able to, for example, afford to go to school because maybe there's no infrastructure. And from our perspective, let's say you've lost all your income. How would that impact on your well-being, mental health issues, and you might not be able to join with them to be productive, or if, let's say, you don't have insurance, then you will have to depend on, let's say, government aid or your neighbors and your family. So it's very important, as this paper noted, apart from just covering the losses, it's just about building resilience within communities and supporting them and reducing the impact of financial loss. And there are some other studies globally that have shown that, for example, we had programs in an agricultural insurance in Africa through the Agriculture Climate Risk Enterprise. That's the acronym ACAR. So these are some of the benefits that we can see, like some farmers were like more risk averse. They would not be willing to participate in a program, but because they had insurance, we had an increase of about, people invested more than 19% and they earn more than 16% if you compare with those who had and those who didn't have insurance. And also transferring risk, because, you are transferring the burden of thinking, okay, what if I go bankrupt? You will, you have someone to back you up in case something goes wrong. And also it releases the burden from governments, because you're taking the risk to a market where there'll be more, more support, and you can reinsure, apart from just having insurance scheme within your country, you can reinsure them to different countries. And that's why we have this particular program in Panama. It deals with, insuring governments, not just individual farmers. So before we conclude, I'll present this particular slide from Metzler. There are different types of risk, and depending on where you are in this quadrant, you either decide to transfer your risk, or you might decide to adopt more adaptation, I suppose. So, for example, if you have high risk and low impact event, then it's very, very good to have insurance, because this helps, because you have 1 to 5 years. releases the burden to the communities and passes it on to an insurance company. And then if you have medium risk, if you cannot be able to transfer it to an insurance, you can retain some of the risk and you can adopt other strategies. For example, if you live in an area which is prone to floods, you might decide to build some banks or something. So apart from having risk insurance, you can self-insure yourself and adopt other methods that will minimize the impact of risk. And some of the risks that have got low frequency, but it has got high impact, sometimes it's very hard to have a local insurance getting those risks. So most of the time you have reinsurance companies covering some of these risks, and you can have governments insuring governments and all that. So in conclusion, we have seen that the different factors that will influence farmers' bidding behavior. For example, your chance of loss. So the higher the chance of loss, the higher you loss, and the magnitude. So if you have an expectation of a higher magnitude, then you will tend to cover yourself. And as we said, you self-insure yourself by applying this correction factor. You say, well, if something happens, at least I'm not worse off. And then we have seen that rent seeking is prone to if you have insurance versus you don't have insurance, and plus if you're risk averse and if you're risk neutral. And then risk mitigation strategy is very important. If you cannot transfer your risk, at least we can reduce it. We can say, well, let's do something different. Or you can avoid it. Say, well, I don't want to live in this area because it's prone to, say, earthquake or something. Or, something that you can avoid. And then some things that we cannot change, you can just accept and build resilience within our communities. Like in Australia, we have, with the Red Cross, they've got the Ready Plan. So it's an emergency response program where it builds resilience within communities. It says, well, if you have bushfire, what should you do? Grab whatever you need and just leave your house. It prepares the community because we live in an area where we're prone to bushfires. So we accept that we have bushfire, but then we cannot just stop there. We have to do something about it. So therefore, we are proposing it's very, very important that risk mitigation strategies and tools should be implemented in some of the conservation programs. Thank you.